Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk, and UK Astrologer. Thank you very much to everybody who's been on the podcast recently, to our lovely guests, Vanessa, Jasmina, Tina, and Megan. And this week, I'm going to talk about eclipses. Now, I don't know an awful lot about them, but the reason I want to talk about it today is because I actually flipping witnessed one, and it was the first one that I witnessed without having somebody stood right in front of me so I couldn't see the flipping thing. Now, I have talked about eclipses before, which is podcast 303, which is a number of years ago now, I think. So having literally lived through one that has just recently happened, I thought I'd quote a little bit from people's books about them and discuss them, and we'll use a chart example, and we will only be considering today the solar eclipses, because as I speak, today's Sunday. This coming week, Friday, there's going to be a lunar eclipse. And then obviously next weekend, I'll talk about what does a lunar eclipse feel like. But I'm only going to talk about it if I can see the flipping thing. If I can't see it, then that's next week's podcast not going to happen. Because I'm sort of, it's not about being of the opinion. I tend to want to pass on information from things that I've actually experienced myself, because there's book learning and there's life learning. Now, obviously, I'm getting on a bit now. I'm 66. So, like, Mary, why have you waited until you're 66 for you to experience an eclipse in any way? It's because, well, I just didn't. So I wasn't particularly interested in that. I've been very interested in astrology for a long amount of time. And I live in the UK, and it's near enough impossible to see anything in the night sky when you want to see it, because we have an awful lot of cloud cover. As I've mentioned in previous podcasts, it has been ridiculously hot here, and because it's not because it's hot, it's just that what's happening with the weather. It's been so hot, there has been no cloud. On the day that we just recently had the solar eclipse, it was roastingly hot, and I thought I was going to boil alive. But because the eclipse happened during the day, which eclipses do, and as I say, I've never witnessed one in any great way other than the one I've just witnessed. Because of that, that's just life. Okay. Now, some people are eclipse chasers, so they follow how the eclipses go round the world, because they're not in all of the same places. So I'm going to share some information with you about how eclipses work, and in this podcast I'm probably going to focus on solar eclipses, because that's what I've just witnessed, and there's a new one coming up which will be a lunar eclipse. Because as I say, unless I've actually experienced something myself, how can I even tell you about it? Yeah. Now, I definitely loved witnessing this one. Maybe it was because it was in the sign of Leo, maybe because the sun was in Leo and I've got a Leo ascendant, and I am ridiculously optimistic. I blame my Leo ascendant. It does actually mean that I'm constantly trying to look on the bright side of life. So I was in the garden with my husband and our doggy, and I wanted to see it, so I bought myself another pair of those eclipsey glasses that you can look at it with. And I am so glad I bought them, because our neighbours over the fence, we could just about hear them talking, and I could hear that they weren't using solar eclipse glasses. They were just looking at the sun. Now, I did glance at the sun a couple of times while the eclipse was happening, just quick glances. I don't want to go blind. And without the special glasses, you couldn't see the eclipse, because it was during the day. It was boilingly hot. The sun was ramped up in the sky where we're located in the southwest of England. And so you couldn't see the way that the moon covered it, and didn't cover all of it, because it was a partial eclipse. It wasn't a total eclipse, it was 90 something percent. But with the special specs on, I was getting so excited about it when it first started, because I kept Googling to try and find out, what part of the sun was going to get covered first, which bit am I looking at, was going to be top right, bottom left, or whatever, because I don't understand all these things. There's maths involved. And I eventually found out that it was going to be some part of what I was looking at with the glasses, and then whatever it was on Google was wrong. I started to see it happening. So imagine the circle of the sun. It was bottom right at the sort of 20 past the hour space. And that started to go a little bit, with the goggles on now, there was a little bit of, you could sort of see this bit of black showing up on the sun. So this little bit was coming in. And then as time progressed, eventually went all the way over the image of the sun with the goggles on now. And so it got less and less of the sun being visible, and more of this black bit, which was circular, obviously, because it's the moon, was coming and causing a sort of a shadowy thing over the sun itself. Where I was in my garden, I thought I had this ridiculous idea to start with, that I'd be able to watch it and be under an umbrella. Duh, Mary, because it was a solar eclipse. I had to be looking in the sun's direction. I am such an idiot. I had to be looking in the sun's direction to be able to see it. And I'm really, really sun sensitive, and I can't be in the sun for very long. So I had the most massive hat on. I had a gazebo up in the garden with a hole in it. So I could have most of me covered up so that I didn't get too much sun. And I wasn't, because I've had this vision of myself sort of relaxed on my garden chair, being able to look up at the sky and see the eclipse. I couldn't do that because the sitting down then brought a shadow. And so I was sort of dancing around the garden, in a sense, looking at it this direction, looking at it that direction, with the special goggles on. Because the other thing is, you can't look at the sun even with the special goggles on for longer than 3 minutes at a time, otherwise you go blind. So I'm sort of skipping around the garden doing this thing. Anyway, point was, it was amazing. It was absolutely wonderful being able to actually see it with my own eyes, not to watch a video, not to watch somebody else's video, not to look at somebody else's beautiful photographs. Some members of the Astrological Association, Rod in particular, took some marvellous photographs, but I wanted to see it myself. I'm a little bit like, I think his name was Doubting Thomas in the Bible. Until I've actually put my hands in or experienced something myself, I haven't experienced it. You've experienced it, but I haven't. And I was there, and you can hear my doggy in the background here. I was there with our doggy and my husband in the garden, and I was perfectly happy. I didn't need to be with a crowd of people, which I could have done. I could have walked up the road there. There's pots of people in the park round the corner. There were people opposite our house, stood outside the front of their house. I didn't want to be with anybody else. I just wanted to be with my nearest and dearest. It would have been nice if I had my son with me, but he was off somewhere. But there we go. And that was a part of it as well. I don't think I would have enjoyed it quite so much if I totally watched it on my own. I don't know. I'm not mad on doing things on my own. But anyway, eventually the sun completely covered, the moon completely covered the image of the sun with the special goggles on. And it took quite a while. It was something like 20 minutes, half an hour. It's not instant. Eclipses are strange. You can't see it moving. You have to sort of look away and then look back, and then you'll see that it's shifting. It isn't something like watching a bird go across. It's not like that. It's really sort of gradual. Yeah, that's why everybody always speeds up the videos that they make of it. But I don't know, I sort of think that sort of loses its significance in some way. Anyway, so there I am. I have now experienced in full view a partial solar eclipse. So let's go on to, because you don't want to hear too much about my story, let's go on to what solar eclipse is all about and how you can work out in your chart what's going on. Now I'm going to start quoting from The Only Way to Learn About Tomorrow, Volume 4 by Marion D. March and Joan McEvers. And Lesson 9 in here is about lunations and eclipses. We're not doing lunars, right? Lunations and eclipses are excellent tools for timing of events. If you see a Mars square Saturn by either secondary progression or solar arc direction, you know that this aspect is effective for about 1 year in the life of the person. How do you know when it may be activated? As explained in Lesson 7, Transits, on page 73, you now realise that a transit may activate the aspect, but it may also be triggered by a lunation or eclipse. So she's talking about lunation. We'll do lunations another time. An eclipse is the partial or total obscuring of one celestial body by the shadow of another. A solar eclipse occurs when the moon blocks the sun's light from the earth, obscuring our vision of the sun. This only happens at the time of a new moon, when the sun and the moon are conjunct. The position of the solar eclipse coincides with the placement of the sun on the day and the hour it takes place. A lunar eclipse, not reading about that. Now, she says, Robert Jensky's excellent book, Interpreting the Eclipses, gives more vital information. He explains another condition that must be met in order to have an eclipse. In simple terms, not only must the sun and moon be conjunct or opposed, but both bodies must be conjunct one solar or both lunar of the moon's nodes. For a total solar eclipse to occur, the sun and moon may not deviate more than 9 degrees 55 from the moon's nodal point. It must occur if they're within this orb. It can, but does not always occur when the orb is between 9:55 and 11 degrees and 15 minutes. Ancient astrologers felt that an eclipse conjuncting a natal planet was a harbinger of great evil and only occasionally a good event. This is she's saying now. 10 years of ongoing experience and investigation have not proven us that this is so. Both lunations and eclipses can act similarly as timers. After all, an eclipse is still a lunation, but neither one activates an event unless that event is clearly suggested by other things in the chart, such as progressions, directions, or transits. If the degree of an eclipse or lunation conjuncts a planet in the chart, it activates that planet. Yet the activation may be somewhat dormant until a transit crosses that same point later. We've not really found that eclipses have much significance and feel they're no more or less potent than lunations. Our theory about lunations and eclipses is that they put a spotlight on the house of the natal chart where they occur, thus highlighting the affairs of that house. Neither should one conjunct, oppose, or should either one conjunct, oppose, or square a natal planet in your chart. The relevance may be somewhat stronger. Of course, as always, you're in charge and can make as much of it or as little as you wish. Blah de blah de blah. So she goes on and talks about Henry Kissinger, who died years ago. Solar eclipses and lunations move through your chart in a forward motion, occurring in one house after another. Lunar eclipses fall in an opposite house. Blah, 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 blah. Lunar eclipses, I think that's it about solar. So that's Marion and Joan. Okay, so I'm now quoting from the Modern Textbook of Astrology, Revised Edition, Margaret E. Hone. An eclipse of the sun takes place when, at the monthly conjunction with the moon, new moon, the latter has no latitude, so the two are not only in the same degree of ecliptic, but also precisely in line with each other as seen from the Earth. These eclipses may be partial or total. The dates of their occurrences are marked in the lunar aspects by the ephemeris, blah, 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 and that is as much as she says. So I thought, oh gosh, those two books really aren't giving me too much info. So what I did was I went and got myself a copy of the book that is mentioned. So I'm now going to quote the man himself. So the book is called Interpreting the Eclipses. And the name of the author is Robert Karl Jansky, Jansky. Now, for someone to write a whole book about something, they've got to either be super interested in it or have some sort of theory, and this is astrology, about the significance of whatever it is. And the book is very detailed and gives lots of examples, and I just want to throw in something that I knew nothing about until I read the book. Now, he talks about a thing called the Saros series, and that is because these eclipses happen on a regular basis, which obviously you've probably twigged, but as I say, I'm ignorant about everything. Apparently the ancients, so this is reliable records of eclipses, have been kept since 747 BC, the beginning of the reign of Nabonassar. Okay, and there's a cycle of how they happen. So if you look at a map of the world and you go to NASA or whatever, it'll give you where the eclipses are going to be. But they shift around the world. I think they start in the poles. So hold on, let me just find the right bit in the books. I hope I'm understanding this correctly. So the way the eclipses work, they go in a cycle. So the Saros cycle is 6,585.5 days, or 18 years. 9 to 11 days, depending on the number of leap years in the interval. There's some evidence that the Chaldeans knew of this Saros interval even earlier in the 6th century. So then we've got this person, that person, the other person. So thus it was early observed that eclipses come in predictable cycles. A complete series of Saros cycles consists of 70 or 71 solar eclipses and lasts for a period of about 1,260 years, with a period of 6,585.5 days between two successive eclipses in the same series. So hold with me here, right? The 70 to 71 cycles in the Saros series follow a very predictable pattern. The first eclipse in the series commences as a tiny solar eclipse at either the North or South Pole. It's always partial. Subsequent solar eclipses occur further from this pole as the series progresses. Towards the middle of the series, the eclipses commence becoming total as their route over the Earth's surface takes them further from the pole where they started and closer to the equatorial latitudes. Later, after a series of annual and total solar eclipses, the eclipses begin to get progressively more partial again, the last in the series occurring at the opposite pole from which it started. So we've got the top and the bottom of the Earth, and they do the thing, and they start at the top and they work their way around and blah-de-blah, okay? And that is a cycle of however many, 18 years, right? Now, so forgetting about the astronomy for a minute. So he says here, and I was like, interpreting the Saros cycles, you may well ask the question, why have I gone into the Saros cycles in such detail? I haven't, okay, only giving you a bit. The information is nice to know and certainly valuable to astronomers, but why is it important to an astrologer? There is a very important reason for understanding the Saros cycle. The ancient astrologer priests used these cycles in their predictions. To understand the importance of the Saros series in their historical perspective, we must return to the time of Ptolemy. And he says that they will return to the sign, attention not only to the sign, location, the eclipse, but also to the star. So he talks about them being near to stars and stuff and whatever, and he was doing more sort of mundane astrology and stuff for kings and blah, 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 blah. And then basically, in a nutshell, the Saros series doesn't occur one after the other. That is, as one series is drawing to a close, the next series has already started to form. Take, for example, the 1928 North Node solar eclipses, which occur 28 apart. He's also talking about the nodes of the moon and when they aspect them, that's important as well. So I think you can see now why I've devoted an entire chapter of this book to the Saros cycles in series. My observations indicate that if we're to understand the nature of the eclipses that we're delineating in the horoscope, then we must first know the nature of the Saros series of that eclipse. Blah, 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 blah. So is it a Capricorn one, or is it an Aquarius one, or is it a Cancer one, or whatever? So we've got the signs of the zodiac, but he says that there are, because it's an 18-year cycle, 18 to 19 years, so the Saros cycles go up to the number 19. Now please don't ask me what Saros cycle we're in at the moment. I have spent all morning trying to find out, and I can't get the answer to that question, and I'm not going to Google it. But on astro.com it will give you the dates of each eclipse, and written in it, and I can't work out from there. Please, somebody that understands this more than me, can you write into me and let me know which, from looking at this, I'll put the link in the show notes, which flipping Saros cycle in there, because I'm looking at this year. So I've got 2026, and we had the total solar on the 12th of August 26, and it says Saros 126/48. I thought he just told me that they're in series of 18s. Do I have to divide that by 18? Oh, that's the point. I hadn't even thought of doing that. No, it's not that. So the one that happened this year is the Saros 126/48. So next year's is 131/51. Honestly, I have no idea. I've worked my way all the way around astro.com to find out what it is. And then your man, so this is Robert, is telling us that they're in 19 years cycles of 19 years. But I suppose it's more important to find out what sign it's in, maybe. Oh, I can so easily get confused. It's ridiculous. So one thing I did take from his book, he says, both historical and modern observations seem to confirm that the astrological strength of any eclipse depends upon its completeness. Well, this wasn't. This was 97%. An annual eclipse being stronger than a partial eclipse, obviously, and a total eclipse being stronger than an annular eclipse. This applies to both solar and lunar eclipses. Anyway, we go into the next chapter when he's talking about delineation. And the thing that Joan is saying as well is the house that it appears in is the most important. So let's get a chart and we'll have a look at the date of the eclipse we've just had and see which house it's in, and then we'll go for some interpretation. Does that make sense? Okay, so going back to Robert. As one begins to delineate the horoscope for the effects of an eclipse, the single most important factor to note is in which of the 12 houses does the eclipse fall. It will be in terms of the house that you will feel most personally affected by this eclipse. Now, in my case, as I've already said, I've got a Leo ascendant. It's very, very late degree, 28. I think it's something like 28 was my chart. My ascendant degree is 27 so many minutes degrees, right? So it was hovering through my 12th house, and so it's not far from my ascendant. Yeah. So it will be in terms of this house that you will feel most personally affected by this eclipse. I really truly was. When the eclipse falls onto one of the intermediate house cusps, i.e. a house cusp other than 1, 4, 7 or 10, the question is raised, which house system do you want to use? He talks about cock being the best one. I'm not going to go into house systems. So the keywords to apply to the delineation of an eclipse are emphasis and crisis. The eclipse tends to emphasize matters in relation to the house in which it falls in the horoscope. The eclipse tends to bring matters related to this house to a crisis stage during its period of effect. The word crisis is not a malefic word if you look it up in your dictionary. It simply means that you're required by events in your life to devote more time, energy and attention to some matters than usual. Herein, I believe, you'll discover the very essence of the importance of the eclipse in delineation. And it talks about, if you don't know the time of birth, but I won't go into that. So in your delineation of the area of crisis or emphasis, be sure to consider some of the more obscure meanings of the house involved. There have been many instances during my astrological practice in which a client could not initially relate to the house emphasised by the eclipse. However, upon more careful questioning, it was easy to establish this link. Let me cite several examples to illustrate this. One client who had the eclipse emphasis currently in the 7th house reported a very serious crisis with one of her children. It was clear that this was the most important problem in her life at the moment. Children are, of course, a 5th house matter. However, the problem was with her, turn the page, second born child, which upon rotating the chart is specifically a 7th house matter. So that's a derived house thing, which we covered a while ago. A second woman with an eclipse emphasis in her 5th house was severely grieving over the loss of her dog, a French poodle, which she'd raised from a pup. Normally, dogs and pets are 6th house matters. However, it later showed that this woman had no children and treated her dog as she would a child if she had had one. Pets treated as child substitutes are more a 5th than a 6th house matter. I would definitely agree with that. A man with an 8th house emphasis emphasised was involved in the final stages of a divorce from his wife, normally a 7th house matter. Upon careful questioning, it was revealed that the cause of the divorce was the wife's frigidity and inability to have a satisfactory sexual relationship with him. The 8th house symbolises what we expect from our partner in the sexual relationship. Another man with a 9th house eclipse emphasis was also involved in the final stages of a divorce. In this case, it turned out that the cause of the divorce was that his wife was suspected of having an affair with the man's priest. Clergy are a 9th house matter. So he talks about the whole thing to do with an eclipse. I'm only talking about solar ones at the moment. Is where is the crisis in the person's chart at the moment? I'm going to be using a podcast volunteer, and we've called them BS, and I think they are female. Yes, so BS, thank you very much for your volunteering. You volunteered your chart a while ago. Now, I've created the eclipse chart itself just so you can look at it. It's always lovely to look at lovely pictures. And I've done it from Spain because that's part of where it was pretty total, because it went over Spain. And we've got the sun at 19 degrees Leo, the moon at 19 degrees Leo, and never going to matter about the minutes. And for that particular chart, if we're locating it in the Balearic Islands in Spain, the ascendant is 1 degree Capricorn, because you've got to sort of take that into account. So I thought probably the best way, taking into account what Robert has said, would be to superimpose the eclipse chart on to someone else's chart rather than doing transits, because the transits are, I think when you do transits on astro.com, it just gives you like 100 hours in the morning or whatever, and that's not when the eclipse happened. It actually happened in the afternoon, which is A, why I managed to see it, because I wasn't asleep. Not that you were asleep during the solar one, but B, the sun was a little bit lower in the sky and was visible from my back garden, right? BS's chart, I've done her chart in the centre. I've created the eclipse chart. I've now used Synastry, so having her details in the centre and the Synastry chart on the outside, because we can see how has this impacted, or is this impacting this person. And just like he says just then, it's an 8th house. So 8th house, sex, birth, death, reincarnation, investments. So we could be saying this client, BS, has come to see us. What's going on for them? Where might the crisis be at the moment that has precipitated you having this reading? Yeah. Obviously, not everybody's coming for a reading because their life is falling apart but quite a lot of times they are, because they want to make a decision and stuff. And where has the most recent crisis been? So I've done the exact date, time, location of the eclipse, whacked it into astro.com, made a chart up, stuck the client in the center, put the Synastry chart on the outside, so we can see exactly from the client's point of view. They could have been asleep, but where's she located? Dorking in the UK, so she would have been awake, okay? And where did the eclipse locate? She's got the eclipse has gone through her 8th house. Sex, birth, death, reincarnation, investments, and other people's money. I hope I've explained that a little bit. And I think the easiest way to do it is to do with the actual eclipse chart itself, because a transit chart won't do it. Where's the crisis for this person? Where might it just recently have been happening? Yeah. So look at your houses. Which house has it gone through? There's a lunar one coming up. We'll talk about that next week. We're talking about the solar ones. And I think the difference between a solar and a lunar is a solar is a lot more obvious and you can actually feel the flipping thing. A lunar is obviously going to be affecting emotions, but I'll get somebody else's book to quote when we come to that. So today we've been covering a little bit about eclipses. There is this Saros cycle. I'm really sorry I couldn't find out which cycle we're in at the minute, but they're related to the signs of the zodiac, because there's 19 of them. And 1 to 19, like, are you early within this Saros cycle? Are you right in the middle? I mean, we've got some proper eclipses when not all of them aren't partial. There was a complete eclipse, so I presume we're somewhere in the middle of the cycle of it, because that's what the first one in the poles and whatever, they're going to be partial. Then as they get further around that 18 to 19 year cycle, then they become more exact. Yeah, so where are you within that? If you've got any questions, then please ping me an email. It's mary@maryenglish.co.uk. If you'd like to learn astrology with me, don't worry. What I teach, the astrology I teach, I know what I'm talking about. Eclipse is a very, very new field for me. Ping me an email, mary@maryenglish.co.uk. I have been adapting my website. Bing. So if you want to have a look at it, it's marys.com, marys.co.uk. There are some changes on there, and there's also some changes about how I take my bookings from now and going forwards. For the moment, not forever, I want you to book your appointment. Then I will send you your Zoom link and a PayPal paymenty thing. I want to go back to being less automated. I've specifically made a change on my website that it makes it more personal when you're contacting me. You can choose your date and your time that you'd like to have your reading. You can choose the type of reading that you like. That's fine. But then I'm going to get back to you with your Zoom link and your invoice. I wanted it. There's too much automation going on out there, and I want to be less AI, less automation, more real, more a real human being. So I hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. Bye-bye now.